You are currently participating in a slow-motion robbery where you willingly hand over the only finite resource you possess in exchange for paper that loses its value while you sleep. The math of a salary is not designed to make you secure, it is designed to make you manageable. When you trade your morning, your attention, and your physical presence for a direct deposit every 2 weeks, you are engaging in a financial transaction with a predetermined loser. You are using linear arithmetic to chase exponential targets. Think of a medieval siege engineer standing before a fortress wall, attempting to breach it by throwing pebbles one at a time. The engineer is working hard. Sweat is pouring. Every throw is executed with perfect form. But the wall does not care about effort. The wall cares about force multiplication. Yet this is precisely how most people approach their financial survival. They believe that working harder within a broken formula will eventually alter the result. It is a comforting delusion. If you double your hours, you double your output, but biological limits arrive with terrifying speed. You break down, you age, you need sleep. Capital does not. Consider the difference between the person who digs the trench and the person who owns the water pipeline. The digger uses muscle, the owner uses gravity. Wealth is never generated by the exertion of force. It is generated by the architecture of systems that require zero human maintenance to function. When John D. Rockefeller looked at the oil industry in the late 19th century, he realized that drilling for oil was a gamble for fools. The real game was owning the barrels, the wagons, and the railway tracks. Whoever controlled the transit corridors extracted a toll from every barrel, whether the driller struck oil or dry earth. He did not sell his labor. He taxed everyone else's. Shift your view from the historical tycoon to the modern executive sitting in a glass corner office on the 40th floor. That executive often makes the exact same mistake as the hourly worker. They receive a massive salary, stock options, and a prestigious title, yet they remain tethered to the clock. If they stop breathing into the phone for 48 hours, the machine stutters. They are merely the highest paid servants on the estate. True financial leverage begins the moment your income generation completely severs its connection to your physical heartbeat. You have been conditioned to view money as a reward for toil. This is the master deception. Money is not a reward. Money is a storage unit for compressed human energy. The billionaire does not think in terms of tasks to complete or projects to finish. They think in terms of equations where human behavior, automated logistics, and capital are variables to be arranged. While you are calculating how many shifts you need to cover next month's rent, they are asking a fundamentally different question. What happens when human labor is entirely removed from the generation of your next dollar? That chain around your desk is not made of steel. It is made of a much heavier material. It is forged from the deeply ingrained belief that effort equals outcome. You were trained from childhood to trade your finite hours for survival tokens, assuming that working harder within someone else's architecture will eventually elevate you to the top floor. The billionaire does not look at a company as a place to work. They look at it as an organism designed to consume labor and excrete capital. While you are busy optimizing your productivity, sharpening your skills to become the most valuable gear in the machine, the person who owns the machine is figuring out how to replace gears with software. Consider the Medici Bank in 15th century Florence. They did not conquer territories with armies. They engineered a web of credit and debt that made princes and popes dependent on their ledger books. Cosimo de' Medici understood a foundational truth of human leverage: the man who moves the chess pieces is always invisible to the pawn. You pride yourself on your work ethic, wearing your exhaustion like a badge of honor, failing to realize that exhaustion is simply the tax you pay for lacking leverage. When you own a system, your absence becomes profitable because the machinery operates on the baseline motivation of other people's desperation. Let us strip away the polite language of corporate culture and look at a Tuesday afternoon in any mid-sized enterprise. You are sitting in a conference room solving a complex operational crisis, feeling the intoxicating rush of being indispensable. You save the project. You get a pat on the back and a modest cost of living adjustment. 3 floors above you, the founder is looking at real estate in the south of France. Why? Because they do not solve operational crises. They design the structural conditions that make other people solve them. You are addicted to the adrenaline of being needed, and that addiction is the exact mechanism keeping you poor. To break this cycle, you have to undergo a painful cognitive rupture. You must stop asking how you can work harder, and start asking whose labor your income relies upon. Every great fortune is built on the systematic outsourcing of suffering and the clever centralization of reward. If you are still the primary engine of your own financial survival, you are not an entrepreneur, an executive, or a strategist. You are simply a high-priced laborer renting out your own cage. But what happens the moment you realize that the market does not reward value, but rather rewards positioning? What happens when you stop trying to be the best worker in the room and start asking how to own the room itself? The answer will cost you every comfortable illusion you have ever held about meritocracy. When you finally let your phone ring out for 7 straight days, the panic you expect never actually arrives. Instead, a much quieter terror sets in. You realize the entire infrastructure you built to handle emergencies was actually just an emergency you manufactured to keep yourself busy. You were mistaking motion for architecture. And that exact realization is why most people stay trapped in the lower tiers of the economy while fortunes are quietly funneled elsewhere. Look at how John D. Rockefeller operated when the oil business was drowning in a sea of frantic competitors trying to find better ways to drill and refine. While every other operator focused on the wellhead, fighting over efficiency and consumer demand, Rockefeller ignored the product entirely. He bought the barrels, then the wagons, then the rail lines. He did not build a better solution. He built the only unavoidable turnstile through which every competitor had to pass. Extreme capital does not chase solutions. It hunts for bottlenecks. Most people are taught to look at the market like a customer service desk, hunting for complaints to fix, inefficiencies to smooth out, or gaps to patch. Billionaires look at the market like a medieval siege engineer mapping out the enemy's water supply. You do not win by making a better arrow. You win by owning the only bridge across the river. Think about the modern commercial real estate tycoon who acquires a decaying strip mall not because they love retail, but because the local zoning laws make it structurally impossible for a competitor to build within a 3-mile radius. That is not business acumen. That is geography weaponized as leverage. When you train your brain to think in bottlenecks, you stop asking how to add value and start asking what happens if you simply turn the lights off. Walk into any corporate boardroom today and you will see armies of exhausted professionals optimizing workflows, cutting costs, and answering emails at midnight, convinced they are driving progress. They are polishing the carriage wheels while someone else owns the toll booth down the road. The brutal truth of capital migration is that money naturally flees from areas of high competition to areas of absolute monopoly, no matter how small or niche that monopoly might be. You can spend your entire life being the most competent problem solver in your industry and still end up entirely dependent on the person who owns the pipe your water flows through. But what happens when the bottleneck you spent a decade securing suddenly becomes completely illegal overnight? The hardest workers in any room are almost always employees of their own terror. They trade sweat for security because their brains are wired to treat loss like a physical predator. But the people who own the room stopped calculating risk that way long ago. When you watch someone build a dynasty from the dirt, you are not watching a higher tolerance for danger. You are watching a completely different architecture of the mind that views the world through asymmetric mathematics. To an elite strategist, risk is not a cliff you might fall off. It is a toll booth you pay only when the odds guarantee you own the highway on the other side. Consider how the shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis operated during global economic collapses. While entire maritime fleets were being liquidated for pennies on the dollar out of sheer panic, Onassis bought broken ships that everyone else was abandoning. Traditional thinkers saw rusted metal and guaranteed bankruptcy. He saw a localized equation: worst-case scenario, the scrap value covered his purchase; best-case scenario, global trade resumed and he held a monopoly on the recovery. He wasn't gambling. He was buying lottery tickets where the baseline price was already paid for by someone else's fear. Now look inward at your own choices. Why do you hesitate to make the pivot, launch the venture, or speak the uncomfortable truth in a boardroom? It is because your nervous system treats a failed bet as a permanent scar on your identity. You have anchored your self-worth to the outcome, which makes every minor friction point feel like a catastrophe. The billionaire mindset achieved something colder: total detachment from the immediate result. They view life as a continuous series of portfolio bets where individual losses are merely data points collected on the way to a statistical inevitability. Imagine sitting at a poker table where you are allowed to look at your opponent's cards before placing your chips, but you refuse to bet big because you are terrified of losing a single white token. That is how most people approach their careers. They protect the tokens while ignoring the hand they were dealt. The elite player does not feel brave. They simply refuse to play games where the upside is linear and the downside is absolute. They look for the rare setup where a total disaster costs them a fraction of their surplus, but a correct guess reshapes the landscape of their industry. The real secret isn't that they are fearless. It is that they have engineered their lives so that the worst possible outcome is merely inconvenient, while the best possible outcome is transformative. They do not manage risk. They design it out of existence by shifting the boundaries of the game. And once you see the board through that lens, you realize the most dangerous place you can possibly sit is the place where everything feels safe. That lifelong pursuit of safety is nothing more than a quiet agreement to fund someone else's empire. Security is the product sold to the cautious so the bold can buy up the world. While you spend your days building financial defenses against an uncertain tomorrow, the ultra-wealthy are not playing defense at all. They understand an immutable law of commerce that business schools refuse to teach: money does not follow hard work or brilliant ideas. Money follows attention, and attention always surrenders to the person who knows how to hoard it. Consider how the Dutch East India Company operated in the 17th century. They did not merely trade spices, they manufactured an atmosphere of absolute scarcity and inevitability that transfixed the entire European continent. They captured the imagination of investors by making their voyages feel like the only game in town. When you hold the collective focus of a population, you no longer need to convince them to buy anything. You simply direct where their eyes go, and their wallets follow automatically. Think about the last time you spent money on something entirely useless. You did not make that choice. The architecture of the environment around you made it for you, designed by people who treat human focus as an exhaustible natural resource to be mined. They build what can only be described as an attention monopoly. Every notification on your screen, Every breaking news cycle of manufactured panic, every sleek interface on your phone is a toll booth. You are paying a daily tax with your concentration, and the dividends are deposited into accounts you will never even see. Napoleon understood this principle on the battlefield long before modern corporations weaponized it on smartphones. He rarely engaged the enemy where they were strongest. Instead, he orchestrated spectacles that drew their entire gaze toward a phantom threat, leaving their flank completely exposed. He knew that the human mind can only process a fraction of reality at any given moment. Fill that narrow window of perception with noise, and you can pick the pockets of an entire civilization while they stare blindly into the light. You believe you are immune because you limit your screen time or pride yourself on being a rational consumer. But ask yourself this. If your focus is currently being rented out to the highest bidder without your conscious consent, are you really the owner of your own mind, or are you just a low-margin tenant living on land owned by someone who knows how to monetize your gaze while you sleep? You keep spending your finite hours making someone else rich because you believe labor is the currency of survival. But the people who own the board stopped trading time for currency decades ago. They realized a brutal truth that the working class is carefully shielded from. Energy cannot be scaled, but systems can. Consider the Medici family in 15th century Florence. They did not conquer territories with swords, nor did they spend their days ledger-keeping in every shop they funded. Instead, they engineered an invisible architecture of credit and bills of exchange that spanned the entire European continent. The system ran whether Lorenzo de' Medici was sleeping, hunting, or traveling. They discovered the first rule of scale: your personal presence is the primary bottleneck to your expansion. If an enterprise requires your constant attention to survive, you do not own a business. You own a very demanding job that you cannot quit. Let us look at how this manifests in a modern corporate boardroom. You watch a senior executive burn 40 hours a week putting out fires, answering emails at midnight, wearing their exhaustion like a badge of honor. They believe they are being essential. In reality, they have built a cage of dependency. Compare that to the silent investor who acquires 3 failing logistics firms, installs a rigid protocol of automated accountability, and steps away before the ink is dry. The executive trades life for incremental income. The architect of scale trades a single moment of design for perpetual motion. Here is the pivot that will make you uncomfortable. You are fiercely protective of your daily routine because it makes you feel productive, but that very routine is an elaborate defense mechanism against building something larger than yourself. You prefer the comfort of direct execution over the terrifying vulnerability of architectural design. Writing code, closing deals, answering customer complaints, these are the narcotics of the competent. They give you the illusion of impact while keeping you trapped in the engine room. A billionaire does not look at a market and ask what product they should build. They look at human behavior and ask what friction can be converted into a toll booth. They build a machine where other people's ambitions, other people's capital, and other people's labor collide to generate momentum without requiring a single ounce of their own willpower. They become entirely unnecessary to their own enterprise, and that absence is precisely what makes them wealthy. If your income stops the moment you stop performing tasks, you are not an owner. You are a replaceable component. And the machine you are currently serving is designed to grind you down until you are obsolete, leaving you wondering why your hard work never bought you an exit. That sudden disappearance you just contemplated. The billionaires you envy solved that exact vulnerability by never playing the game you are currently exhausting yourself to win. While you are busy trying to outrun your rivals in a crowded market, they are quietly rewriting the rules of the entire arena until winning becomes mathematically impossible for anyone else. They do not seek a competitive advantage. They engineer an environment where competition is structurally forbidden. Consider how the Dutch East India Company operated in the 17th century. They did not merely build faster ships to beat the merchants of competing nations, they bribed officials, manipulated foreign policies, and established total logistical monopolies over spice routes, making their rivals obsolete before a single cargo ship ever left the harbor. The market wasn't beaten. It was swallowed whole. You are wasting your energy trying to become the sharpest knife in the drawer, while the architect simply melts the drawer down. Pivot now from ancient trade routes to your own career, because this exact dynamic plays out in every modern boardroom and startup incubator. Think about the software company that gives away its foundational tools for free to universities. They are not being generous. They are embedding their proprietary ecosystem into the muscle memory of the next generation of professionals. By the time those students graduate and enter the workforce, they cannot even conceive of using a competing product. The switching cost is no longer financial, it is cognitive. The architecture of their daily thinking has been captured. This is the true anatomy of an invisible monopoly. It operates like a parasite that convinces its host it is a vital organ. You do not fight for market share when you can quietly define the very language the market uses to think. Notice how the people with the most leverage rarely argue with you. They simply adjust the boundaries of what is considered possible until your objections sound naive. They do not outsmart the system, they own the definitions that constrain it. If you are still trying to prove your worth based on metrics defined by your employer or your industry, you have already accepted a cage with pre-built walls. The ultra-wealthy do not ask how to get a bigger slice of the pie. They buy the bakery, shut off the ovens, and wait for everyone else to starve, wondering why their recipe failed. Which brings you to an uncomfortable realization about your current projects. Look at the metrics you obsess over daily. Are you optimizing a machine that someone else designed, or are you quietly building a toll booth that nobody can bypass? Because if your entire livelihood depends on performing better than the person sitting next to you, you are not an owner. You are the product being refined. And the most dangerous part of this realization is that the toll booth isn't built with money, but with something far more difficult to trace. The irrelevant competition you wake up to fight every morning is the one you are currently winning, and that is precisely why you are poor. While you are busy outworking your peers, optimizing your schedule, and saving fractions of your income, you are simply playing a more efficient game of survival. But the person who builds an empire does not play a better game, they refuse to exist within the rules of the board. Look at Andrew Carnegie in the late 19th century. When he consolidated the steel industry, he did not do it by working harder than other mill owners. He systematically dismantled his own identity as a mere manufacturer, transformed himself into a logistics and infrastructure titan, and rendered every single competitor obsolete by changing what the industry actually was. He survived by killing who he was yesterday. Here is the secret nobody tells you about acquiring massive wealth. It is not an accumulation of assets. It is the total execution and burial of your current self. Every single dollar you desire sits on the other side of an identity you currently despise. You want the bank account, but you are still fiercely protective of the person who has the habits, the emotional triggers, and the worldview of someone who is perpetually broke. You protect your comfort, your opinions, and your need to be liked, completely unaware that these are the exact architectural pillars holding up your financial ceiling. A venture capitalist does not evaluate a startup based on how hard the founder works, they look at whether the founder is capable of undergoing an ego death when the market shifts. If your identity is tied to being right, being moral, or being liked, you are structurally uninsurable to wealth. Money flows exclusively to individuals who are utterly indifferent to who they were 6 months ago. Imagine walking into a high-stakes negotiation where the opposing party realizes you care nothing about your reputation, your past promises, or even your own pride. You can pivot instantly because you have no emotional sunk cost in your previous statements. That terrifying flexibility is what the world calls ruthlessness, but it is actually just a complete absence of an ego anchor. Wealth requires you to treat your current personality like a rental car you intend to drive off a cliff. You think you are blocked by a lack of capital, a lack of connections, or a lack of luck. Those are comforting illusions. You are blocked by your own relentless loyalty to the person you see in the mirror every morning. You refuse to betray your past. You refuse to let go of the beliefs that justified your past failures. So let me ask you a question that might make you close this window. If your current self had to completely vanish tomorrow morning so that a multimillionaire could take your place, what part of your daily routine would you fight tooth and nail to protect? You wanted the secret to how fortunes are forged, looking outward for a hidden strategy, waiting for someone to hand you the architectural blueprint of an empire. But the tragedy of your position is simpler and much uglier than you realize. You have spent your entire life searching for the architect while standing on the drawing board. Think of Jean-Paul Sartre sitting in a Parisian café, watching people perform their professions with meticulous, almost terrifying dedication. The waiter plays the role of the waiter with too much precision, the patron plays the wealthy intellectual with too much posture, all of them acting out a script handed to them by society. They are not living, they are executing a character written by someone else. You do this every single day in your career, your relationships, and your ambitions. You treat your own life as an audition for a movie where the casting director died years ago. Pivot. Step away from the abstract philosophy and look at your own calendar right now. Notice how much of your day is spent managing the expectations of people who have zero stake in your survival. You call it being professional or being a team player, but it is actually a sophisticated self-sabotage. In the high-stakes corporate restructuring of RJR Nabisco during the late 1980s, executives lost billions not because of hostile market conditions, but because they were paralyzed by how they would look in the financial press the next morning. They prioritized their social narrative over the math of the balance sheet. You are doing the exact same thing on a micro scale. Every time you hesitate to make a ruthless cut in your life because you are terrified of looking selfish, you are trading capital for comfort. Consider the solitary confinement experiments conducted during the Cold War. Psychologists discovered something horrifying about the human mind when all external stimuli are stripped away. After a few days, the subjects did not break because of the guards or the cold cells. They broke because they had to listen to the sound of their own internal monologue without any distractions, and they realized that the prison warden they feared most was the voice inside their own head generating excuses for their captivity. You wake up every morning and meticulously polish the very cage that keeps you small. You blame the economy, your upbringing, your boss, and bad luck. But deep down, in the quietest hours of the night, you know the truth. No one is keeping you from building an empire except the terrifying prospect of finding out what you are actually capable of if you stop making excuses. As the old proverb warns us, when you look long into an abyss, the abyss also looks into you.